So that brings us to item 3, and as mentioned, we have a lot of speakers. Do we have a presentation on this item first?
Yes.
We do. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and hear from our presentation, and then we'll hear from speakers, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions.
Thank you. Is this on? It is. So my name is Matthias Segura. I'm the operations officer for AISD.
I'm having kind of a hard time with the speakers. I don't know. I think that you have to get them super close to your mouth to actually broadcast.
Touch these things. So,
Dr. Jager Reach, I'm the Chief of Staff for the Austin Independent School District.
Well, thank you very much for having us. We have a presentation, if we could bring up.
Can you give us a sense of how long your presentation is, just so we can be preparing for that? And I assume you'd like questions at the end. And
absolutely, we would love to have questions. We can adjust the presentation as such. We'd like to make it a resource for the joint subcommittee, so we can make it as short as 10 minutes if we'd like.
And can we dim the lights a little so that it's more visible?
My laptop.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's have the presentation, then we'll do Q&A.
Yeah, and I would like to hear the presentation you've prepared. I mean, the point of this subcommittee is for us to swap. I'd like to hear the presentation in full. The point of this subcommittee is really for us to be able to share information, and we need to make sure that that information is shared. Thank you.
It's open. They just need to bring it up. Sorry about that. Oh, great. Perfect.
Would you like me to start, or?
Go ahead and start.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having us. As I said, this is an update regarding the school changes process. Today we'll talk about all the work that's been going on since the beginning of this year and provide an update as to where we are in the process. So one of the things that we often try to communicate are, what is school changes? What are we trying to accomplish through this process? And what we're trying to accomplish is figure out a way to best identify the limited resources we have and make sure that they go into the classroom. We're doing this in an effort to really explore how we can improve as an organization and how we can be more mindful of the limited resources that we have. So again, our students deserve a better school district. We want to have highly effective and culturally proficient teachers. We want to have rigor in our curriculum, and we want to make sure that our students are in the best facilities possible. We certainly recognize that teachers that are concerned about heating and cooling or whether the water is going to run is space and time that we're taking away from the classroom. So we're really trying to understand how we can improve this across the district. So if you distill it down to 3 bullets, problems that the school changes process aims to solve are, use funds more wisely for students and teachers, not aging buildings, address inequitable practices through system-wide approaches, and you'll see that reflected in some of our scenarios, as well as continue to modernize campuses throughout our district. So, what are the realities that we face? One of the things that Dr. Cruz, the trustees, and leadership, we constantly talk about is, there's an environment that we're in right now, and it's very different than what it has been in the past. The student expectation is very, very different, the way students learn. The declining enrollment that we've seen for the better part of a decade, the increasing cost to operate and maintain our buildings, gentrification, the things that we see in our environment really all are pressures that we have to navigate as we move through this process. So really what we're trying to communicate is that we're in a different environment, and if we don't adjust, we don't make some decisions, then we're going to continue to be in the same state that we are, and we don't believe that is appropriate for our students. So where are we? In September 4th, I believe, we released version 1. Version 1 included 39 scenarios, and at that time, the scenarios were meant to be independent. They were meant to be options, meant to be things that the trustees would consider, our communities would provide feedback on, and that ultimately would coalesce around a recommendation, which is what we're moving towards here in November. Since then, we've added 3 scenarios.
T.S., when did you first announce that? I'm missing the timeline on here.
September 4th, I believe, is when we released it.
This year?
This year.
And you're moving to make the decision in November.
November 18th. So, so the first time I presented here, I believe June 9th or 18th or 12th, we had talked about when the process started. We started with the process back in February of this year. And at that time, we'd laid out a timeline that actually took us to an earlier vote. Through the process, we've realized that we needed to make some adjustments. We needed to really think about how this rolls out in an effort to be as effective as we need to be. So in September, we released the 39 scenarios. Since then, we've added 3 around special education, recognizing that there's a deficiency in how we support our most vulnerable students. Strategic academic core, making sure that all of our campuses have the same amount of rigor, whether it's East Austin, North Austin, South Austin, West Austin. We wanted to double down and make sure that was clearly reflected in the document. And lastly was strategic staffing, recognizing that our teachers need to be in the schools that need the most support, and we have to think about how we can change as an organization to help them find those places to teach those students. So a lot of the information was collected through the engagement process after version 1. We've since released version 2. That was earlier this month. The document has been adjusted to reflect a lot of the feedback that we heard in the community. One of the things that I want to be very, very clear is that the version 2 document really focuses on year 1, right, the 2020-2021 school year. And the reason this was done is because the team, leadership, many of us recognize that some of these things just weren't quite ready. We needed to either investigate further. We heard from our community and felt that there were actually better ways to do some of these things. So we decided to break down the package into things that we could implement in year 1 and then provide a framework and timeline for how we would begin to move forward with some of the other challenges that we have starting in the spring of 2020. And so just below that, you can see that we have 11 scenarios moving forward through version 2. 8 scenarios are no longer considered. They've been withdrawn. And then we have 21 others that we need to continue to explore and improve through the spring semester. So we had 20 active listening sessions within the community, and we had an additional 20 either tied to a specific campus or ad hoc, so well over 40. And some of what I'm sharing with you right now are some of the things that we heard. You can see difficulty in merging school communities, concerns about well-being of teachers, students, and staff, frustration and lack of trust in the decision-making timeline is something that we heard. The data and the logic that was used to select one school over another was something that we heard time and time again. And we tried our best to communicate that, but we certainly felt like we needed to do a better job. Boundaries, boundaries are something that comes up all the time about, how does the boundary discussion play into not only this process but also long term, and it's a very difficult conversation and a challenge for us, and we're looking at different ways to implement that moving forward. Other things that we heard, I apologize, is the equity discussion. As you all know, we have an equity officer that joined the district, Dr. Hawley, in June of this year. As soon as she came on board, she participated in the process. And what we wanted to do was to be intentional about how we reevaluated each of the scenarios using different equity tools that she has brought to us. We've spent a lot of time training and trying to improve the scenarios with the guidance she's provided. And you'll see that reflected in the document, but also, as we move forward, we're going to double down and make sure that the ones that aren't being considered for 2020-2021, we do that in the spring and really do that with a mindfulness towards it. Concerned about moving students to lower performing schools, requested that AISD review adjusted feeder patterns to create greater continuity, and then wanted to ensure that students who transfer to the affected campuses are grandfathered. We have a lot of ability to support our students in a variety of ways, and exploring all of those are certainly available to us, and just wanted to reflect that some of the feedback that we received along the way. So by the numbers, you can see since September, had about 1,700 folks participate in well over 40 community conversations. You can see what occurred pre-September, what occurred in the summer, and where we are now with the community meetings and online engagement. So one of the things that Dr. Hawley and the team, what we wanted to do before we were releasing version 2 was to talk about what are the core problems that each scenario is trying to address, recognizing that not every scenario is going to address all three, but each scenario should address a problem. If we couldn't make that connection, then there was no need to move it forward. So the team worked collaboratively, and we came up with these three: meeting the social, emotional, physical, and academic needs of historically underserved students. Discrimination and favoritism in the district have resulted in segregated schools that follow the city pattern. And then limited funds restrict the district's ability to invest in the academic core, developing leaders and teachers in district-wide programming. So our goal was to communicate in the scenarios in the equity analysis how each one of these addresses a specific problem. So some of the guiding questions we used in the equity analysis, which is available in version 2 in the appendix, include these. What are the problem statements does the scenario address? Would the scenario have a positive effect on historically underserved student populations? Is the scenario responsive to feedback we received from our staff during the process? So these points here, really, I want to share them because these are the points that we evaluated the scenarios against using the equity framework. Would you like to take a picture of that?
I would think.
Okay.
I know we said we're not going to ask questions now, but is this available? Is this presentation available somewhere?
I will make it available to the group and we can post it, but the information is actually in our appendix of version 2.
Great, but in terms of this presentation, we can make it available as backup information for
Absolutely.
Today's meeting. Super, thank you.
Has it been posted online, though, as part of the backup for this agenda item?
No.
No.
It was just completed this morning.
Got it. Okay,
All
but
right,
we'll have that
I'd
available.
like to get a
Thank you.
picture of it as well, so please hold.
Scenario options, equity analysis, logistical, and
Go
financial.
back, please. I'd like to get a picture of it.
Okay.
I'm not going to remember all these, and they're important to understand.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move. Scenario options, equity analysis. One of the things that we wanted to make sure was that any of the scenarios that we were moving forward in 2020, 2021, we had the bandwidth as an organization to actually implement. One of the worst things that could occur is that we commit to doing something and not follow through. And secondarily, we need to have the financial wherewithal to do it. So in the equity analysis, you'll see an assessment of those two things. And those two things are very, very important because if we can't do it and we don't have the funds to do it, then no matter how great the scenario is, it shouldn't be one that we present and bring forward to the trustees. So some of the changes in version 2, just to begin to wrap this up, we have distilled down the district-wide scenarios to 10. The first being, these are very, very important. I think if you think about where equity truly comes into these scenarios, they're certainly reflected in many of the scenarios here district-wide. District-wide cultural proficiency inclusiveness training. This is a commitment to make sure that not only the leaders, but principals, teachers, the entire organization goes through this training so that our students, our most vulnerable students, in fact, are supported properly. Academic excellence, this is the academic rigor that I discussed earlier. District-wide special education, we talked about that earlier. Family first expanded school hours, this is one that we heard loud and clear in our community. The fact that we needed to make our schools available to our communities from 6 to 6:30. We believe this will allow us to compete and bring some of those students back into the school district. We're very, very excited about this. And we have a structure of how we would roll that out, starting with the campuses that are affected first in the school changes process, but also Title I. 5, you can see strategic staffing, which I talked about earlier, and then cultivating tomorrow's teachers. The 3 proposed consolidations, closures, Norman Sims partnership. This is where we have Norman and Sims. They're currently co-located at the Sims site. They'll be moving into the modernized facility starting in January 2021. The Metz and Sanchez partnership, 2020. Metz and Sanchez, very similar. We have a $25 million project at the Sanchez site funded by the 2017 bond program. So those two schools will be merging together and moving into the new modernized facility. And then the Pease re-envisioned affecting Pease Elementary School. In version 1, the strategy and the thought was that we would bring the Pease community and Zavala communities together, co-located at Zavala, and then repurpose Pease to be a social justice and the AISD archives and open it up for programming for all the students across the district. And so that was presented in version 2.
Just to clarify, though, are those the only remaining school closures and consolidations that are on the table for the November vote?
So in version 2, there is another one. It's Brook, Linder, and Go Valley. So when we presented version 2, and this is why it's written this way, we kept Brook, Linder, and Go Valley as a yellow. It wasn't one that at that point was a recommendation. We wanted to present it to the board in a work session or information session, get feedback, and then make adjustments. So in version 2, which was released earlier this month, it was not a formal recommendation. It was an option that was still within a document. And so if you go to version 2 document, you'll see it kind of teased out as a separate scenario for consideration. But that's the only other one. Great question. I can provide additional detail around that, Commissioner, if you'd like. Version 2 also includes boundary changes in Southwest Austin, around Baranoff, around the new Southwest Elementary School in Kiker. We have some schools that are severely overcrowded, and so looking at how we can move the students into the improved spaces at the same time, not overload any of the schools that we have in that area. And then lastly, the enhanced campus-specific programming, the first responders at LBJ Early College High School. One of the reasons this is moving forward, many of the other programs within the school changes process, we've actually pushed into the spring semester so that we can co-create with our communities. This one in particular, because of all the work that's occurring with the health professions school at the LBJ site, which is funded in the 2017 bond, we wanted to make sure that we made a commitment and fold that into the actual design of the project, which is why it's moving forward at this time. So with that, I'll pause and ask for any questions. Again, Jacob and I can tackle just most of them. Thank you.
Colleagues, we probably will have questions too after the speakers, but does anyone have questions or comments? Do our trustees want to add anything before we hear questions from other members?
We'll wait.
Yeah, I think the comments will be helpful and inform my question, so I'd like to hear what people have to say.
Okay, great. So as we discussed, let's do 3 minutes for the first 5 speakers, and then we'll go to a model of 1 minute to 1.5 minutes for the rest. And I apologize that we don't have more time. We typically don't have a big audience. It's great to have you here, and we want to make sure that we have an opportunity. We have 2 really major issues before our community right now. One is the school changes, and the other is the land development code. And so trying to divide up 2 hours between those 2 major changes is a challenge. And now we have an hour and a half plus 5. So, okay, our first speaker is Paul Saldana. So the first 5, unless you decline and would prefer to go to the 1 minute to 1.5 minute spots. Our 3-minute speakers are going to be Paul Saldana, David King, Bradley Hargis, Melissa Hargis, and Ricardo Zavala. Everyone else, you're looking at 1 minute to 1.5 minutes. Welcome, Paul.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, let me thank you for your public service. As you may know, I am a recovering AISD trustee and had the pleasure of actually serving on this committee for a few years along with the Regional Affordability Committee. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Paul Saldana, I'm here in the capacity as a parent and as a husband of an AISD school teacher. I think it's real important to put it in perspective of how we got here. First, I think it's important to, inform everybody or help them remember that the district actually called for a district-wide equity self-assessment in 2016. And so that was done. Unfortunately, the equity self-assessment was completed by AISD only. There was never a third-party, independent, objective equity self-assessment that was done district-wide. And the reason I wanted to start with that, because that's really important, what you didn't see in this presentation is how do we define equity and equal? And I think at the end of the day, the definition of equity and equal should be based upon how the actual students and families that are served by AISD experience equity in their schools. It should not be an assumption made by AISD or any of the trustees. It should really be based and focused on how the students and families served by AISD are experience equity. And then, of course, before we even got here, there was the adoption of the facilities master plan. And actually, I was on the board when that adoption took place. I remember it because that meeting went until 3:30 in the morning. And Dr. Mathias and Cindy were also there as well. But one of the points that was pointed out during that very long discussion was the fact that, in fact, there were three of us who voted against it, myself, Dr. Mathias, and former trustee Dr. Gordon. And the main reason we voted against it because we cited equity issues, that the district was continuing to basically perpetuate segregation in the district, and there continued to be a historic divide between East and West Austin. The other issue was the fact that there was conversation about schools that were under-enrolled and under capacity. So the district came up with a plan to develop what's called target utilization plans, TUPs. The challenge with that is that it put the responsibility of increasing enrollment on the parents, teachers, and principals of the schools that are already struggling. And so my concern has been is that the district set them up for failure. Brook is a good example. Brook went through a TUP process, but they're on the closure list again. And so I felt it was really important to say that. There were three amendments that were adopted by, actually four amendments that were adopted by the board, and I actually helped to push forward three of them. And one talked about the fact that we needed to make sure that these target utilization plans were developed top down, from the community up, not based on assumptions of what the school district felt was appropriate for those communities, but to actually be developed in partnership led by the community themselves. And that has not happened. And so now we have a situation where we've identified more schools, including one, Pease Elementary. Pease is actually the token. I'm going to say it. It's the token school because it's considered west of I-35. So version 1 and version 2 still perpetuate desegregation, classism, and segregation because the majority of those schools are east of I-35 and economically disadvantaged students. And the last thing I'll just say real quick, if I may, is the fact that I'm concerned about the optics of this building. This is a new AISD headquarters that was purchased at the corner of I-35 and Ben White that the school district has spent $60 million on. We're telling kids and families in East Austin that we don't have money to keep your schools open, but the district has $60 million for a new headquarters. And I think there's a problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saldana. Mr. King? To be followed by Bradley Hargis.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service to our communities. This plan is called the AISD School Changes 2019 version 2.0 plan, but really it's the AISD School Closure and Consolidation Plan. If a food company mislabeled its products in this manner, it would violate federal food labeling regulations. The name of the plan is purposely deceiving to make it seem innocuous with just a few changes that benefit the communities. In fact, it's a plan that will close 12 schools, displace 4,100 students, and cede AISD territory to charter schools. The AISD school plan doesn't fulfill Austin's values for equity, excellence, balance, and growth. Equity that lifts up the least privileged. Excellence in planning, teaching, curriculum, programs, and leadership. Balance of power, diversity, resources, and opportunities for all schools, and growth. As Austin grows, AISD student body and schools should grow as well. An analysis of the AISD school closure and consolidation plan by the UT Institute for Urban Policy Research and Analysis indicates that a majority of the closures are concentrated in East Austin, disproportionately displacing black students. Black and Latinx students account for 62% of the AISD population, but 80% of the displaced students. The plan is likely to further segregation in Austin. A large body of research highlights that school closures and consolidations do not work as cost-saving strategy and disproportionately affect low-income and minority students, rarely improving their academic performance. School closures and consolidations undermine academic performance in displaced students and include hidden costs for closed buildings and fuel political conflict, which we're going through right now. Here's one change that AISD should make immediately to help AISD schools be more equitable. Funding from PTAs and friends of groups that support wealthy schools should be factored into the AISD funding for those wealthy schools. AISD should reduce its funding to those wealthy schools by the amount of the funding those wealthy schools get from the PTAs and friends of groups. And that money should be directed to funding for Title I schools. So I'm asking you to reject the AISD school closure and consolidation plan and enroll the planning into the AISD 2020 strategic planning. And I might add that the issues we're talking about this plan are very similar to the issues that we're talking about in your later agenda item on the land development code. There's a lot of mislabeling going on with that plan as well, and a lot of inequity that's built into those the LDC and the map. And I'll get to that later on when it's my time. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Mr. King.
David, can you share that UT study with us?
Yes, I will.
Is that available? Thank you.
Yes, I will.
Again, our last speaker for 3 minutes will be Melissa Hargis. After Melissa, I'm sorry, Ricardo Sabella. After, our next group of speakers are going to be Kennard, I'm sorry I can't read the last name, but it starts with a W, Sarah Pedrosa, Stephen Knapp, and Carly Weaver. So you might just start thinking about that. Welcome. 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Commissioners, council members, trustees, thank you for your time. My name is Bradley Hargis, and I've spoken to the district regarding many concerns I have with the schools to be closed over the next several years. But today I wanted to direct my comments to this body regarding one particular issue, one that directly impacts everyone on this committee, and one that requires a coordinated response among all the stakeholders, and that is growth. The city and the county have spent considerable time and great attention has been paid to planning for and encouraging growth. Our community will see through both market forces and intentional planning with the property code revision, expansive and life-changing growth in many of the communities most impacted by the school closures in version 1 and version 2. I have provided a very recent projection regarding estimated population growth over the next 10 to 40 years by council district. Over the next 10 to 20 years, these communities and the schools that are being closed and consolidated will expand massively. Research shows these communities will be filled with young professionals who will soon begin young families. To achieve Austin's goals of a denser city, one with greater walkability that does not completely gridlock our city, we must consider the hearts of these neighborhoods for the next 50 years, and those are the schools. Districts 1, 2, 3, and 9, East Austin and downtown, will see growth rates between 47 and 24%, according to these cities' numbers, over the next 10 to 20 years. For that growth and the planned density increases, livability will be a challenge. We have to move away from our primary mode of transportation being cars, and that requires planning. For example, while I can routinely walk from my office to my son's school now, under the consolidation plan, I will have to drive 6 miles round trip each day through the congested heart of the city because I cannot office outside the urban core, and there will no longer be a single school left in the urban core. I ask this committee and all the elected officials who are planning for the next 25 to 50 years of our city life to deeply coordinate their efforts and look not where schools are needed today over the next 5 years, but where schools will be needed over the next 10 to 30 years. Because without access to schools, families cannot and will not remain in Central Austin. They will be forced out of the city, and as a fifth-generation Austinite, I desperately hope to remain one and not be driven out myself. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you, Mr. Hargis.
And thanks for this document.
Melissa Hargis, thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Melissa Hargis. Thank you for your time this afternoon. To put it succinctly, AISD suffers from budgetary issues, as do many governmental bodies. While a firm number won't be available on this year's actual budget for some time, it's safe to say that the district needs to be careful with its money despite there not being a budget deficit anymore. Although the stated reason for school closures has been to put children into 21st century learning environments, the actual motivation for this plan must be fiscal. Since schools will be closed, communities will be dissolved, and children will be relocated to schools that have not undergone modernization. The district's proposal is what's known as a scarcity plan. You're probably familiar with such a plan as it's frequently employed by retailers when stores perceived as underperforming, too expensive to operate, or not worth investing in are closed with the promise that the saved resources will be reinvested in the remaining stores. Think Sears and Kmart. Such a plan typically results in a death spiral for the business. While a governmental entity, AISD is also a business, and it is bleeding students to charter schools. Something must be done. But we know that school closures fail to save money for school districts unless mass layoffs, which are absolutely not being proposed here, coexist with that closure. And we know that because other cities have walked the path that AISD proposes to walk. Those cities failed. charter schools have flourished in the wake of such failure. I'm thinking specifically of Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, just as a few examples. Research done on these cities and others was conclusive as to the inefficacy of school closures to achieve fiscal savings. And the research also showed that school closures perpetuated inequity and resulted in negative student outcomes. And y'all have got a handout from Dr. Terrence Green at UT with the sources for those statements. The district has no data or reasoning as to why the failures of these other cities would not be repeated here. Those cities were well-intentioned, just as I believe AISD is. In fact, San Antonio took a similar path and has been forced to reopen schools due to population growth at substantial expense. Such growth is coming to Austin. The district instead should be proposing a growth plan to fill vacant seats and draw families back from charter schools. A growth plan for the district would be more in line with the path the city and county are taking to encourage economic investment in Austin, including housing density, improved transportation corridors, and a destination for tourism and business options. School closures should be removed from consideration until the district has additional data to back the success of such a plan and to distinguish this plan where so many other cities in a similar position have failed to improve their fiscal position through school closures. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zavala. Welcome.
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your public service. My name is Ricardo Zavala. I am one of the community leaders and founder, president of a group called Dove Springs Proud. Second generation Austinite, and our organization's been around for 6 years now. I just came to do a short, one of our schools, which was Palm Elementary, was on version 1 for closure. It's no longer on version 2 as a recommendation. So I'm probably one of the few here to thank you for not having our school in Dove Springs on the round of closures anymore. I have, just like you have constituents, I have constituents. I have 700 constituents, part of my group, and they wanted me to come and tell you that they appreciate Palm not being on the closure list anymore. Also, wanted to let you know that Dove Springs is one of the zip codes, according to United States Census, of the largest, fastest growing zip codes when it comes to youth in the city of Austin. In the 2010 census, we were the #1 zip code with the #1 growth of youth in the entire city of Austin. So your future workforce, your future educated population in Austin will be coming from Dove Springs area, regardless of what part of town you represent. The youth of Dove Springs will be all over Austin. So just wanted to keep that in mind, that our youth out there have a large influx of youth. So I didn't want to take up all the time, just wanted to tell you that on behalf of my constituents, that we're glad that Palm is not on the closure list anymore.
Thanks so much.
Can I just clarify, is it permanently off the closure list, or is it just postponed on the closure list?
So one of the things that we learned and we reevaluated when we went to look at all of this was that there may be other solutions regarding Palm that allow us to really understand better how the Blazer and all the growth that we're seeing in the Goodnight Ranch, and if there's an opportunity to look at a boundary adjustment. And so through those discussions, we felt as though recommending Palm in version 1 or version 2 would not be appropriate, because we need to spend a lot more time evaluating how we can perhaps siphon students off from Blazer in the Goodnight Ranch area. So it's under discussion, and we're going to continue to evaluate it, but we're not, the solution that was presented in version 1 and version 2 is not appropriate at this time.
So it has a temporary reprieve, but it's not permanently off the closure list. Is that correct?
I would say the issue is still there, but we think we have other ways to resolve it.
And
so the 5 seconds would be, we don't want Palm to close. There you go. And,
Thank you,
and we
Mr.
would like
Zavala.
for it not to be back on the list.
Great. Thank you so much. So I do want to continue with our speakers, but if you could help us understand, just to Commissioner Shea's question, the schools that were identified for changes or closure in version 1, to what extent are those scenarios still viable? Are they still going to generate conversation among the trustees? Are they just not being considered now, or is it different for each one of those?
I think it's fair to say that they're not being considered now, but the solution could be different for each one of those. So we are, suggesting 3 with still discussing a 4th that may come forward that we know that we could act on this year. The others may have something else that we need to consider, and because it's different with everyone, I don't feel there's a general way for me to explain, here's what needs to be considered. So they are still under consideration, and our plan would be to have further conversations with our board on what a timeline could look for continuing those conversations on those other 8.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So I think it's fair to say that they may continue to be viable scenarios or not, depending on the individual situation.
That's correct, but for those 8, we are not bringing forward anything for a vote to the board this month.
Perfect, thank you. I see one of our other AISD trustees. Thank you so much for being here with us, Trustee Singh, and if you'd like to join us up here, you're certainly welcome. It's your choice. We often have others from our bodies attend, and so they usually sit up here, but again, it's your entire preference. Now it's Friday. It's casual Friday.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody cares how we're dressed. It's Austin.
Okay, Kennard?
It's not being televised.
I think I must have the name wrong.
It's being taped.
Kennard W? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sarah Pedrosa, and then to be followed by Stephen Knapp and Carly Weaver. After Carly will be Sarah. And you each have a minute, absolute max, a minute and a half. So, thank you. And I know that's a very short amount of time. You're certainly welcome to communicate with any of us via email after the meeting. Well, let me say, I would invite your emails, and I'm sure my colleagues would too.
You can cut me off, and I will email the rest if I don't make it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Carrie?
I'm sorry. I thought I was on the list of public speaking. Did I? I got here around number 4, number 5. So I'm just. What's your name?
Did we have 2 different sheets going? Yeah, Carrie, you're on the second sheet that I was given.
Okay.
Did we have a mix-up there?
Yes, so.
Yeah, there were 2 sheets, and I assumed they were sequential.
The one with more names was the first group that signed in, and then the second sheet was used.
Oh, okay. I don't know what that means.
So this was the number 1 sheet, and that's the one we're working down, and then this is the second sheet, and I have you carry on the second. So, thank you. And we have a kind of a practice at council if you have little ones that you can come up earlier. So if you're here with a little one who may not make it through the discussion and you want to, just come up after our next speaker.
Or they could come now if they need to.
You're up here, so we'll go ahead. Thank you.
So I'm actually here. My name is Sarah Pedrosa. I'm here speaking on behalf of others, Eva Rosenthal and Caroline Estrada, who can't be here due to professional obligations. They are teachers. This information will be emailed to you all, members of the committee and the staff, by them. I do feel it's important to highlight that the information that they're submitting is evidence that the Metz, Sanchez, and Zavala communities have been engaging in and enduring conversations around school closure and equity since before the 2017 bond election. And this is what they've prepared for you. To whom it may concern, we are submitting the data that was presented to the Metz, Sanchez, Zavala Modernization Project Planning Committee at their June 7, 2018 meeting. We continue to have concerns and questions regarding the site selection process, particularly as it pertains to air quality and AISD student and community health. We would like to highlight that due to air quality concerns, the state of California has banned new school construction within 500 feet of a highway. Sanchez is located within 500 feet of a highway. If all means all, then our community, the AISD administration, trustees, and stakeholders should not be okay with any of our kids being exposed to pollutants that endanger their health, but especially our kids attending Title I schools, since they have higher rates of respiratory problems like asthma, and especially if there are other options available. Thank you. Their emails will be in the packet that I give your staff members.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Next up, Steve Knapp.
1 minute, right? Cool, no problem. I'm Stephen Knapp. I want to say thank you guys for meeting. I was actually surprised to hear that there is a joint committee because when I first found these scenarios in the fall, it sounded like this, wow, this is a scenario plan that's out of concert with the rest of the planning that's being done both at the county level and the city level being proposed by AISD. And so to the trustees here, I'd hope that you would understand that this is a good thing that you can have concert in planning. I'll give one example. My children are at Ridgetop Elementary, which is currently on the do not close vote in November, but to be brought back up in the spring. And here's one example where I feel like you guys are really out of concert with what we're doing in the city. Ridgetop Elementary is at 51st and Airport Boulevard. Right across the street, dare I say literally across the street, the county is building 140 affordable housing units. So we have bonded ourselves to that
For
project.
families.
For families. Those housing units would be in the boundaries of our school that's foreclosure. Those housing units that are under construction today do not appear in your own demographer's report. Dare I expand farther, you have 1,900 family housing units today under construction on the Airport Boulevard between the Riley and Ridgetop zones that do not appear in your own, oh my goodness, that was fast, your own demographer's report. These are on corridors that we bonded ourselves to $700 million to make the airport corridor as part of that program just 2 years ago at the sea level more applicable to safe and conducive environments. So we are trying to do things to get families into our central core, retain those families, give them housing options. Land Development Code you'll hear later will bring more families in. Your plan is to close these urbanized schools because of site constraints. And I'll give you one quick example now. Hush up. To act like an urban school, your planning development manual requires you to have a 400-foot zone for buses to load in and out of. Ridgetop Elementary was cited as site constraints because we don't have a 400-foot zone to load buses into. We have one bus route that's served by us, and we're an urban school zone where people are biking and walking to. You need to understand you're an urban school living in an urban environment. Many other entities are working to do things in here to make these safer for families to live and walk to school. But yet your criteria is saying that we cannot support schools here. So plenty of things to unpack there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our next two speakers to come up so that we can just move quickly from one to another so we preserve time. Carly Weaver and Sarah Thorens, if you would both come up and address us. Yes, if they want to come up, please do. All right, our next round will be people with children who have those constraints, time constraints.
Okay. I am a Brooke parent. I'm opposed to the school closures, the main issue being the equity issue. I'd want you to make sure that you look at the appendix to the version 2 and the moon chart as what it's referred to, that there out of the 8 issues that is supposed to be addressed, there's only 3 that are somewhat addressed, so that some of the criteria are moving forward. Brooke is in that special spot of needing more consideration because it doesn't meet equity. It isn't equitable. There are many parents that have gone through the school closures before that have attended Brooke, so they're being displaced again. There's a lot of misinformation and data about Brooke Elementary that's out there that is moving this decision forward too quickly. The fact that Brooke is getting a modernized building is not accurate. They want to give us empty Brooke as fast as possible to put kids into a building in Go Valley Elementary that has an F student achievement rating while Brooke has a B. Linder has major plumbing problems while Brooke remains standing. We have a unique campus that needs to be celebrated. The community there is not being heard, that we want to stay where we are and do not want modernized buildings.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weaver.
Thank you.
Hi. Okay. AISD's current plan to vacate 4 schools in areas of town with projected...
Would you mind, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm Sarah Torrens, an AISD graduate and parent.
We'll restart the clock for her, please.
AISD's current plan to vacate 4 schools in areas of town with projected immense growth is puzzling. The city of Austin projects anywhere between 23.4 to 47.3 population growth in the 4 districts affected by the school closure proposal. This is not a negligible amount. I'm asking that this subcommittee consider the irreparable changes to the city's landscape that will occur when historic schools are shuttered in areas of our city seeing unprecedented growth. Do not allow these short-sighted fixes for an unproven budget crisis to create educational deserts in this town full of couples and families who do and who will benefit from access to our public schools. Please also consider that several professional, community, and educational organizations in Austin have publicly opposed the board vote to close schools on such an aggressive timeline. Along with these advocates, the families and school communities affected have repeatedly asked the district and board for more time to consider impacts and alternatives. My hope is that the school board will build on the momentum of this moment by allowing school communities to come to the table with their brilliant ideas to improve enrollment, capitalize on resources, and save our public school district.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Next, if we have parents with little ones. And if you would just start by introducing yourself so I can find you on the list.
Yes, I'm Alicia Cooper, and I am a Maplewood parent. I have lived in my neighborhood since '06. It's right by 38th and a half. And while I got into this because Maplewood is on the list, even though it's not right now in November, I have stayed because as I went to more and more meetings, it became clear how, even when I went to the Austin District one, and first of all those meetings tended to be during the week, and there was really only a few. I think the district-wide one was at Austin High, was on a weekend, and for people that have kids and jobs, it was really hard for the whole communities to attend that. While I ended up coming because of Maplewood, as I went to all these different meetings, it saw how not thought out the plan seemed to be. We had so many TBDs of what was going to happen, and there was this urgency that we could not understand, especially financially, when we were getting new students coming back to the district and we were getting more money, and we gave teachers raises and everything, and I think our deficit was down to $3 million from 30, and it just seems like Austin ISD is giving up on their neighborhood schools. And as a growth for a city, I don't understand how growth is not a part of that, because right now we're finishing a financial budgetary thing, bottom line. But when we close those schools, when the parents actually want to come back to Austin ISD because those other schools have gotten better, where are they going to go? I feel like we're playing a battle instead of winning the war. And like he said, let's think not 5 years, let's think 20.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Back to our regular list. Thank you. Stephanie Leach. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay. Come on up, please. And you will be followed by Stephanie Leach. So, Stephanie, if you would like to take a seat. And then next will be Amanda Embleton. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. I wanted to thank y'all for being here and for listening to us. I'll try to be quick about it. A lot of the concerns that have been addressed with regards to the data that was used to kind of initiate the school changes proposal have points of concern. I believe that we should be addressing the school changes based off of research and accurate data, as well as more thought out, more involved community engagement. The school consolidations, as I mentioned, we have questions about some of the facility reports, as well as the enrollment. We were projected to lose students, but we actually gained them. With the new growth happening in Austin, I do feel that it behooves us to act in that interest, to attract more students, to have room for growth. The schools have not been given adequate time to come up with a solution before discussing the school closure plan. We have viable solutions. We have ways of addressing these concerns with the budget without having to close our schools. The schools in the East Austin, and for me, I see East Austin east of Congress Avenue, predominantly east of I-35, but or east of Mopac, you can do that as well. Closing schools in the East Austin opens the gates for charter schools to take AISD students. They're paid more than the public schools for their students. their teachers do not require to be certified teachers, and they spend less per student and pay teachers less than the public schools. And students in charter schools, the research shows that they perform lower than public schools. And so I just wanted to ask that those issues be considered and addressed. I don't know if I'll be here at a later point, but I just wanted to say I also have questions and concerns regarding the new landscape and code development as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And would you mind reintroducing yourself?
I'm Amanda.
For the record.
I'm
Thank
Amanda
you.
with Maplewood.
Maplewood.
Yes.
And what's your last name?
She
Embleton.
is, yeah, we've got her on.
Embleton. Yeah. So I jumped ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stephanie Leach. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Leach. I'm a parent of 2 kids at Ridgetop Elementary School. And Steve has already spoken about how school changes and the new land development code seem to conflict. I'd like to talk about Ridgetop's successful programming. Ridgetop has a dual language programming that was developed to close achievement gaps for English learners, but it benefits all. And actually, in 2013, Ridgetop was even identified by this joint subcommittee's own school and family work group as a successful campus-based initiative for retaining families and strengthening schools in Central Austin. It's been tough, but since then, our program has managed to stay diverse, even as the city has become less and less affordable. And today, Ridgetop is one of the most integrated of elementary schools in AISD, in spite of past racist policies of the district that are still being felt today. Ridgetop's dual language program is a model for the district and one worth preserving and supporting fully. And I ask today that everyone works closer together to make sure that the many policies and changes currently proposed are in fact coordinated and ensure that our community as a whole will benefit.
Thank you very much. So our next group of speakers will be Patty Everett, Noelita Lugo, and Christine, I'm having a little trouble reading your last name, thank you, to be followed by Carrie Cordova. So Patty Everett, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Patty Everett. I'm a community public education advocate, parent of an AISD Pease Austin High graduate. I want to address an issue quickly that has not been adequately addressed by AISD in its plan or the budget projections, which is the fiscal impact of charter school expansion as a result of school closure. It's not conjecture. This issue has been raised time and time again by parents at school closure meetings. I work on the issue of charter proliferation statewide, and I'm very concerned. The fiscal impact is real. Currently, AISD loses $100 million annually to charter schools. Charter transfers represent almost 20% of AISD enrollment, total enrollment. I am a strong and avid AISD supporter. I recently spent 2 months coordinating AISD's efforts to push back against a new charter proposal. AISD staff and principals hit it out of the ballpark in a presentation to the State Board of Education. They vetoed the proposal, and AISD saved $85 million over 10 years. But I want to speak specifically to Pease related to charter expansion. It's a downtown school, all transfer, parents choose, godsend to working parents. Important, it's one of the 10 most racially diverse schools among the 85 elementary schools in Austin. That's very important. One thing about charters I know, they are smart, nimble, and they seize an opportunity to fill the gap that districts provide. A charter that opened to serve a downtown population, targeted working parents, and can draw students from the entire district would be an innovation and a model to replicate nationwide. Surprise. That is Pease. AISD should be writing Pease up as a model for districts around the country, not closing it. Closing Pease doesn't make sense, and it's short-sighted. It seeds this innovative model and an unserved geographic area to charters. And make no mistake, they will jump in to fill that gap. Thank you. And thank you all for your service as public servants. I bow down to you. It's hard work, and I want to thank each one of you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you for that information you presented. Would you mind making sure that I know I would like it emailed, and probably my colleagues would too. There were some data points in there that I'd be really interested in.
I've been presenting to ACPTA, and I'm going to be presenting a couple of different times, and I'd be happy to email it to
That'd be super.
very people.
Thank you so much.
And I also want to thank AISD again. We have these incredible assets and resources. I cannot tell you, the state board could not believe what great programs and what great staff AISD had when they presented. So,
yeah,
Thank
very
you.
good point. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Hi.
And next to the table will be Christine. Thank you.
All right, so my name is Noelita Lugo, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Save Austin Schools. So I want to just start real quickly. So my mother is Otomi, my father is Mexican, and yet I have great privilege. I have 2 bachelor's degrees from UT, I have a master's degree from UT, and I'm trained in community building. And I have access to great social capital, and I pledge to use that capital to advocate for equity in AISD education. In just a matter of a few weeks, we were able, as Save Austin Schools, to build in and pull in 3,000 people to our cause. Imagine what we can do in the next coming months. We want to work with AISD. We want to feel and be represented by our AISD trustees, and I want to give a shout out especially to those trustees, Arati Singh and all the trustees who have been at the meetings, really listening to the community, asking the tough questions. Thank you for being there with us. And I hope that AISD sees the light and pushes pause on these closures for all the reasons and many more that have already been presented. We hope the trustees vote down closures. Hopefully AISD will take that off of their proposal, but that's yet to be seen. And what we would really ask from Save Austin Schools with AISD and the trustees is that we work together to restart with guiding principles that don't pin us into a box leading us down the road of school closures, but really gives us an opportunity to be creative and to work from guiding principles based on equity, excellence, balance, and growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, you're next if you'd like to join at the table. And then next will be Dusty Harshman.
Hi, my name is Christine Garanya, and I have children at Pease, Lively, and Austin High. And I just want to make clear that Mr. Segura here makes it seem like it was a seamless process, but these changes have been made due to the sheer will and anger of many parents and stakeholders. AISD did not do the due diligence they needed, and I've been to meetings for 3 years. So I can speak to that if someone wants to talk to me later about the lack of authentic community engagement. But I'm really here to speak more about Pease. We had our community engagement meeting last night, and if you're not aware, we were originally slated to close at the end of 2021, and then we were moved up in version 2 to May 2020. And we asked why, of course. Why all of a sudden have that change? And you know what we were told? Because we can. Because we can. You children are not slated to get any modernization. Your children are not slated to go to another school, so you don't need the time to find another school or another place. It is a casual cruelty that AISD is impinged upon our families and our children. Our deadline is not May, our deadline is January. We are an all-transfer school. We need to find homes. Some people go to schools that are slated for closure later on down the line. Some people go to schools that are dual language schools. They are not allowed to go to those schools at that time. We need time to be back on the timeline to 2021 to explore different avenues. So the treatment of AISD towards Pease is cruel and it's short-sighted. And I think a lot of parents, not just at Pease, see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caranya. And as I understand, you have presented your community, as PTA president, you and the other advocates for Peace have presented a plan to the AISD.
We created specific engagement plans. AISD had come to us and we had talked about perhaps things that we could co-create, and we took that at their word. So I'm still hoping that could happen. Who knows? As things, it's been kind of pell-mell, quite frankly. So I'm still hopeful. And, you know, I am grateful. I know everybody's working hard and has good intentions, but we also have to think of the impact of those intentions.
Thank you so much. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Cordova. I'm a professor at UT and an AISD parent, and I'm concerned about the school closures and equity. I just want to reiterate some of the things, but also advance a few things. I want to point out the ways in which the entire plan has been inequitable. And so maybe that's also been said, but now we need to also recognize the ways in which the second version, pointing at these 4 schools, hold the most minority population of students district-wide, with 67% Hispanic and 16% African American. While African American students only comprise 7% of the district population, 41% of the students at Sims Elementary are Black. Another, at Brook Elementary, 88% of the students are Hispanic. The uneven racial and socioeconomic impact is obvious to anyone. Further, how is this impacting students with special needs? My son goes to Dawson Elementary, which has been granted a temporary reprieve. Approximately 1/4 of the students at Dawson Elementary are served by special education programs. And AISD says to create a seamless transition with the least amount of disruption for our most vulnerable students, families and district staff would need to co-create transition plans for each student. They are continuing to have meetings with Dawson and Galindo parents this week after they released version 2. So they are still on a mode of consolidation. So this reprieve, whatever it is not true. And further, Brook Elementary has an even higher special education population than Dawson. So how is this not applying to Brook Elementary? Finally, or at least another point here, is to bring up turning Pease Elementary School into a social justice center is one of the ways in which they're packaging this. How is it not better to make this a children's education site directly next to the Capitol? Throughout this process, AISD has claimed budget constraints, particularly pointing to recapture, to legitimize defunding some of the most vulnerable populations in Austin. I want to point out that the policy created to invoke equity across the state is being used to violate equal access to education within the city of Austin, and that is a point for a lawsuit. So I want to bring that to your attention for any of you that are considering the disproportionate impact of this kind of plan. So thank you, and I do appreciate all of you, but these are very real concerns. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordova. Dusty Harshman, you're next. And next is Jessica Wilson. I think Wilson is your last name. And then Nancy Mims, and then John Gonzalez. And those will conclude our speakers. So welcome, Mr. Harshman.
Good afternoon. My name is Dusty Harshman, and for 4 years I've served on Austin ISD's Facility and Bond Planning Advisory Committee. I just wanted to share some experience and observations from that service. I've been a frequent attendee in many of the school changes conversations, and it's clear that the mass closure nature of a facility-oriented plan continues to dominate the conversation in as much as the district has attempted to broaden it. During 2 months of breakneck community engagement, the district, sometimes I say we, but we'd hope to engender trust around newer but fewer campuses in the city's eastern crescent, offering better student opportunities and outcomes. Instead, school changes reveal that we still have a significant trust gap that exists in our eastern crescent school communities, and you're experiencing some of that today. In essence, AISD has asked many communities to accept a sacrifice with the promise that trust would be earned back with interest shortly thereafter. In my experience in serving in AISD's committees, we learned that trust is best earned first, and that during the calm thinking of strategic process, we can make difficult decisions together with our involved communities. As opposed to folding a set of strategic recommendations into what is essentially a campus consolidation plan, it might be wiser to discuss potential closures in the context of an equity-centered AISD strategic plan, of which AISD is currently developing for the 2020 to 2025 cycle. That would be my recommendation. I think the county and the city have a strong role to play. I think a new approach to the district strategic planning is necessary at this time in our civic history together. I think bringing experts in from the university, again, from city government, from county government, from chambers of commerce, from our AISD-oriented nonprofits, this is essential. This is an essential part of the strategic planning process. Bring the facility recommendations into that process so they can be more fairly vetted. Thank you.
Thank you, Dusty.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. My name's Jessica Wilson. I'm the proud president of the Brook PTA. I've also served on AISD Changes think tank, and I'm on AISD's Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee. Closing Anderson High School was a mistake, and closing Brook Elementary repeats that mistake. Brook has academic distinctions in math and science, an inclusive atmosphere where everyone, including our high percentage of special education, and that culture carries to everyone. We're a Green Flag Eco School, and we've added pre-K and kindergarten classes. If you follow the building capacity from the AISD Accountability Office, we're at more than 90% full. However, we found out yesterday that the district is using a number that is based off of 4 classrooms that are not available for kids. They are used by other organizations. We can't put kids in there, and yet that is counting against us. Our community feels we exceeded the top with our own perseverance, and then the goal was moved. We are more than 90% low socioeconomic, and many of our students are in subsidized housing. This proposal rips our school family apart. The proposal is to send our campus in 2 directions. We're their home. We've heard that kids sent to Linder are going home, but the district made the boundary decision to send those kids south of the river to Brook in 2006. That was before those kids were born. There is a very real savings of $15,000 that could be achieved by sending those kids south of the river to Linder. It's very difficult to stomach when we see a $60 million building going in for the headquarters. If we do the math on that, that is 4,000 years of bus savings to keep our kids safe and in their school community. I understand buckets of money come from different places, but our community does not understand those values, and that is not what Austin is. Brook should be celebrated and used as a model of how a school can thrive with few resources. East Austin wants to be family friendly, and the Land Development Code and the AISD School Changes Plan, I believe, and that's why I've served through the process, I believe we can make that happen, but that is now up to you to do it. We want to stay in East Austin. We want to support the public school system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. Nancy Mims, and then our last speaker is John Mackenzie Gonzalez.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Mims. I'm here to ask city and county partners to encourage AISD leaders to stop the plan to close schools until our new Chief Equity Officer, Dr. Stephanie Hawley, is given the opportunity to engage the district in a thorough equity assessment. As the Statesman reported just yesterday, officials have yet to conduct an analysis of how school closures would benefit or hurt vulnerable student populations. So when district leaders tell you they have done an equity analysis for version 2 of their plan, which is up for a vote in 2 weeks, make sure you understand that they've done some of this work on the programming side of the plan, but not on the part that was the entire impetus for this plan, closing schools in the eastern crescent of the city. My neighborhood school, Lee, evaded the closure list, even though many of the data points being cited by the district even though it shares many of the data points being cited by the district as reason to close and consolidate schools, many of which are in close proximity to Lee. Why? Because Lee is predominantly white and wealthy and is perpetually protected by its racist history. The racist history of the city and district, where segregation is maintained and where privileged white West Austin schools and neighborhoods are more valued than schools and neighborhoods in the eastern crescent of the city. The School Changes Plan asks for sacrifice from some of the city's most vulnerable populations. It asks black and brown communities, poor neighborhoods, and some of the city's integrated school communities to bear the brunt of austerity measures that the district weaponizes to make these communities believe they must sacrifice for the greater good. Meanwhile, schools like Lee are granted greater privilege and autonomy and are never asked to sacrifice because we're constantly enabled to believe we're entitled to the benefits of a district that maintains its original design of favoring white, wealthy, non-disabled students. Please take the opportunity to interrupt these racist practices of maintaining an east-west division of inequality. Please stop this plan. Please let Dr. Hawley do the work she was hired to do. Please listen to the communities being harmed by ongoing inequitable practices. Please engage these communities in creating and maintaining the schools they want and deserve. Please stop this plan.
Thank you, Nancy. Welcome.
My name is John Gonzalez, and I am a parent of a kid in Dawson Elementary.
and I've been attending these school meetings, and I must say that my community has expanded drastically as a result, has increased my love and enjoyment of AISD. So I'm here as a true believer, as someone who drinks the Kool-Aid of public education after having drunk the Gatorade of private schools. I prefer the Kool-Aid, and I hope you do too. I'm here to speak to Agenda 3, and I'm here to say that the school closure part of the AISD reinvention plan, 1, ignores relevant case studies of other school closings. 2, will only exacerbate a situation where we continue to lose students to charter schools. 3, are politically and fiscally reckless. And 4, are asking Central and East Austin communities to bear the cost of the fiscal responsibility of West and Southwest Austin's refusal to fund education in the 2013 bond. Ultimately, the closures ignore the role of public schools in the life of our neighborhoods and our city. You'll hear 2 magic numbers from AISD. There are 6,000 missing students, and 522 is the ideal size for elementaries. 6,000 is the number based on the number of classrooms that were built in 2010 for students and the number currently enrolled in 2019. Those are the 6,000 missing students. That is a dynamic relationship, not a concrete number. Why, in a city that brings in 53 people a day, when the population in Austin under 18 has expanded from 175,000 in 2010 to 192,000 in 2017, why has AISD lost 6,000 students when the number of possible students has increased by 17,000? Chicago, Oakland, Detroit, Philadelphia, and D.C. have all engaged in school closings to address the loss of population and tax base. And what they have found is that school closings are more expensive than expected. Oakland, rather than saving $30 million, lost $10 million. That's a $40 million change in revenue. Chicago and Philadelphia, okay. Other people have said that much better than I have. It doesn't work in other places. Why is Austin different? Well, Austin is different because it's growing and its tax base is growing, completely different from the urban core cities I've just discussed. I don't know why we're doing that in that way. Second of all...
Sir, I do need to ask you to conclude.
Okay, quickly. Small schools versus 522. Our local and staff developer argues that we need mega modern schools to treat people in a 21st century way. What this logic ignores is that putting minority students and vulnerable students with disabilities in large elementary schools causes more problems for them in terms of their adaptation than other places. So building mega modern elementary schools in vulnerable neighborhoods in East and Central Austin will only kind of exacerbate the lack of adhesion for people in these places. We're asking that somehow we are better than the rest of the country. And maybe we are, but I'm not sure we should take that risk.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating in this conversation. I know it's hard to limit comments to minute and a half, especially if you've been anticipating 3 minutes. So thank you for your forbearance on that. Colleagues, and we have, as I mentioned, one other kind of major topic. My suggestion is going to be that we see if there's a possibility of having a special called meeting at some point between now and our next so that we have an opportunity to really fully address the land development code changes that are contemplated. But let's take some time. You can be pondering that. And why don't we agree to talk until, say, 10 to 20 minutes of questions and then turn to our next subject. Does that seem doable? I know it's not ideal. Let's just jump into questions, I guess, for now. What questions do you all have? Councilmember Alter.
Can you speak to how the developments in charter schools and demographics interfaced with the choices that were made and how that data was used and what that data was?
Yes, I can. Again, Matthias Segur with Operations Officer for the school district. So we have a demographer's report commissioned every year. There was a year, 2 years ago, where we changed consultants, but every year we get this information, and we use that information to support our long-term planning efforts. And you know, I want to be very clear that yes, the city is growing. There is a lot of growth, but what we're seeing, however, is the types of populations that are moving and that are finding homes in these areas are not the same types of populations that produce the number of students that we would see in our schools. And so that's one of the things that our demographer looks at is the information around students that live in the attendance boundaries that attend these schools. Not necessarily transfers, because we can't plan for transfers. You know, principal changes, a program changes, and all of a sudden the transfer rates could change significantly. So we really look at the attendance boundary and the number of students that live in that attendance boundary, and based on the demographer's report, what information we have that'll tell us, you know, in the future years what our student population may look like. They do get information from the City of Austin regarding upcoming projects. We're constantly trying to figure out if it's accurate, how it's changing. But really, at the end of the day, the biggest difference between our reports and the cities is that ours is truly tracking the types of families in the units that are coming online that would support the types of families that would actually produce the students that would go to our schools. And that's available online, and every year we have it produced, and we actually are receiving this year's report later this month.
I think I can speak. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Good. I said I think I can speak a little bit to the question about how we track charters. As I'm sure Ms. Everett would agree, right now charters do not share a lot of information on both their expansion plans and on their student numbers and the data where their students come from. That's due to a lot of different reasons, but also the requirements that are in the law on what the charter should provide is not really enforced. So for the most part, when we find out about new charters, we may not have information on where they will actually be located, the number of students that they will actually serve. Many times we're finding that out because we're learning about the purchase of the building before we're actually finding out where they're expanding to. Also, we are limited in the data that we can get directly from charters on the students who are there. While the Texas Education Agency does have access to this information, it's not information that they share back out with us. So what we can do as a district is, of course, when a student does transfer from an AISD school to a charter, if those records are requested, then we will see that that student's going to a charter. Also, when students come back, the same thing, if they are bringing those records back from a charter. And so we have actually adjusted our systems to keep track of students so that we can have more robust data on who those students are that are going either way. We've also added a question that will be coming up next year on our registration form to ask parents, are they coming from a charter? What we're hoping is that this will allow us to also reach out to those parents, perhaps to learn some more on why they came back. We also want to replicate what we did 2 years ago, where we actually hired a company to help us survey parents who had left. We did not know always why they left, but we were trying to focus on those who left to go to charter schools so that we could understand and ask those parents why did they leave, and then start using some of those reasons to help adjust the changes that we're doing at our campuses. And that actually led directly to our customer service campaign that we started a year ago, because one of the things that we heard is that there was a poor customer experience that they had. It may have been with someone in the front office, someone at the school, but many of the parents, although not all, said that they had a poor experience with someone. Could have been someone in central office, whatever it was, so that we knew that we really needed to put a focus on that for our customer service.
Okay.
Chair.
Commissioner.
So this is a process question, and it's a foundation question, and what I really want to know is what tools you used to measure intra-district equity, and how far did you go back in that assessment?
Do you mean for dollars spent or for equity in general?
Okay. I think dollars spent would be one good measure, but I think that the history of school closures, I think that the manner in which we deploy resources like after-school programs, like parent-teacher advocates.
Yes, that's
true. I'm looking at the tools that are used to address the intra-district equity that is obvious, and how far did we go back?
Have the info on the. No. You don't. Well, I can speak towards the per pupil spending and the money. So we have tracked that every year for multiple years, looking at our per pupil spending across all of our campuses. For the most part, this is not always true, but for the most part, That cost is driven by two things, by school size and then, of course, by student demographics, especially when you look at special education students, which sometimes have higher needs, which bring in more dollars. So you will see that a school that has a higher percentage of special education typically has a higher per pupil expenditure. And then schools that are smaller typically have a higher per pupil spending. So we did look at that information. You know, you mentioned going back, and what I can tell you is that when looking at that data, we just went back a few years, although we have multiple years of data going back for as long as we've had the electronic systems keeping track of our expenditures. As far as some of those other questions like the availability of PSS, mental health centers, family resource centers, after-school programs, we did review that for how it exists now to look at where those programs are located. And we also made a commitment when looking at that if we were looking at any consolidation to where it was a potential that a school would be consolidated somewhere where there was not a PSS, where there was not an after-school program, that we needed to make that commitment to ensure that new site would have those programs. That is part of our version 2 proposal also, and it's part of the budget that you would see in that version 2, which includes ensuring that there are parent support specialists at these campuses, that there are increased after-school programming, and also looking at before-school programming, something that is somewhat new to us. But looking at expanding before-school programming also. Looking at the family resource centers, looking at the availability of communities and schools, which also helps us expand out to other partners in the area. And then I'm missing one, I apologize. Someone said mental health, thank you so much. And looking at the availability of mental health centers and how we can ensure that at these new partnerships that either we can expand the mental health services or start providing mental health services at these campuses. It is our goal at some point for every campus in the district to have mental health services, but we said that we would want to prioritize those schools that we're looking at for consolidations.
And just to follow up, Commissioner, one of the things that Dr. Hawley has instilled in us is trying to make sure that we understand the history as we go through this process or any process of this magnitude. And because of that, one of the things that we're doing within the operational side of AISD is going back to essentially 1920 and trying to understand how the dollars are spent on an annual basis, but also through bonds in the 70s and 80s, just so that we have a very clear understanding of how we got to where we are. A lot of the information, I think will be useful as we think about, what decades of inaction in certain parts how that's kind of gotten to us to where we are, and I think it's a really important data point, and we've been working on that for quite some time. It's a lot of information.
Got two follow-ups. Do you know the demographics of your PSSs, and do you know the demographics of your teaching corps?
The teacher corps, yes, and I do have that information. The PSS, we have that information available. It's not a report that I've run just for PSSs. If that's something that's of interest of this group, we can easily run that data also. But the teachers I have that I could email as soon as I have just a few minutes.
Okay. Just because, if I were looking to determine what my communities were telling me, I'd want to know how many charter schools were in my general vicinity, what's close to them, what types of services are they providing. What charter schools have figured out is they've taken the old segregated school models. They have decided that they're going to make sure that they serve breakfast and lunch and some dinner. They have figured out that they're going to provide tutorials for kids after school, safe places for kids to be. We've talked about, I'd really like to see the transition plan that tells me, okay, this is a school that we're targeting for providing resources. What resources are we providing? Which charters are in that area? How do the resources that we are planning here compare to the ones that are being planted in the other school districts? When I was NAACP president, it was during the first year of the TOS, if you all remember the TOS, and the administrative code required that if a student failed one portion of the TOS, that they be immediately put into a remedial program to get them up to grade level and speed. What AISD did, instead of putting remedial programs together, and we proved this in court, we won the case, was they put kids in special ed so they wouldn't have to test them. So we've got a terrible, painful history. When you look at when we say that we started in 55 or so integrating the schools, but in earnest we did it in 71. And do you know the first two things that happened in 71? We closed L.C. Anderson, the most important institution next to the church in the community. And we built Eames Independent School District, professors from UT. We've got to understand the context. And what that began to do was it meant you lost principals, you lost counselors, you lost master teachers. So the question becomes, what are we doing now to recruit? Where are we recruiting? Are we going to minority-serving schools, Hispanic-serving schools, African-American serving schools? Are we building specific programs to recruit? When our teachers come, are we making sure that professional development is predicated on the population that they're going to be seeing? Are we pushing them to pursue master's educations? Because if we destroyed the supply line, then we've got to rebuild the process. I'll quote Malcolm X and then I'll sit down. He said, when you stab me with a knife, pulling it out is not enough. We've got to make sure that we are building a fundamental program that takes into consideration our historical inequities, and we build back in a way that you can demonstrate, in a way so that I know the number of campuses that we have gone to, so that I know the number of teachers that we have brought in, that we have looked at how we can impact housing opportunities, because we can partner with the city and we can partner with the county to make sure that housing opportunities are available, because we've got resources to do that. But there needs to be a comprehensive series of programs that tells me I'm rebuilding the foundation before I say I'm going to take something else away. It's important. We've got to, and I don't want this to be us against them. We've got to work together, and we've got to, everybody's got to feel that we've been heard, and everybody's got to feel that the legitimate things that have been pointed out have really been addressed to the extent that we can. Can't do everything, but and I think having a number of meetings is really important, but what is more important is the system that we put in place to make sure that the best of our resources are placed in the most difficult of our challenges. And we've waited for a long time, and a lot of this, you guys weren't even born then. But at the end of the day, it is left to us to solve this problem. So when I ask those questions, I'm looking for a historic context and really understanding and overlaying the issues that are being asked, because we have done many things quickly, but we've got to get it right at some point. Because when you look at this city now, and I moved here 34 years ago, you go down 12th Street, which was a primary African-American place, you can't even tell African-Americans used to live there.
Yep.
And when we look at the Hispanic community, it's beginning to look that way as well. All of our institutions, and nobody's off the hook on this, when we start talking about investment, and when the city talks about investment, we've got to talk about the least of these that haven't been served well first. When the county, we have to do it as well. School district, Cap Metro, all of these institutions have underinvested in the parts of town where minorities live. And we've got to make sure that we invest in those places first, because only then will I believe that you're listening, you're hearing me, and that you're really trying to build community. In order to build community, the community's got to believe it.
Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Okay.
One of the things I wanted to understand, because I know you've really tried to reach out to a lot of different segments of the community, can you just talk a little bit about the role of the Chambers of Commerce? I know they've had a big interest in this issue. Can you just talk a little bit about their role in it?
We updated them like we've updated lots of groups on the process, but that's about it.
Oh, I know that Drew Cheverly in particular has been very actively involved. In particular, he was involved about 15 years ago with the push for the closure of many urban schools, including Becker. I believe Barton Hills was on that list as well. I think Zilker was one that was mentioned. So there is a recurring theme here. And I just want to say for the record, I think they have had a much larger role than what you've described, and maybe you haven't been in some of those meetings, but I've heard from others that they have had a very heavy hand in pushing for adoption of a very aggressive school closure plan. And I think that that needs to be part of a very public discussion, because if there's a single group in the community that has an outsized influence on these decisions and the community is not aware of it, there can't be any accountability. So I'm saying this now because I think they need to be held accountable and they need to be part of the public discussion about how these decisions are made. I did have a couple of questions. The data that was handed out about the growth in the, I think it's the city council, the city council districts. Have you all seen this data? Are you at all familiar with it? It's just the growth data.
The author of it?
Delphi Trends for the Imagine Austin 2040 study. Bradley Hargis handed out. There it is. I believe this was one of the consultants that worked on the trend analysis, although I'm not certain about it. But anyway, this data indicates some very substantial growth trends, and certainly we all see it every day. I mean, and all the numbers that we hear, anywhere from 50 to 175 people moving here every day. Clearly, this community is growing, and I'm assuming that you also paid some attention to the proposals in the city's land development code for dramatically increasing density in the urban core. Was that part of what you all looked at? I mean, I'm not being facetious. To me, it's just hard to reconcile these two.
Yeah. So regarding the demographers report, we want to constantly update that. We want the most accurate information, and again, we're tracking growth as well as students, and those are two things that are very, very important to this process. Secondarily, we are working with the city as they go through the land development code rewrite process, trying to provide feedback along the way as to how some of the proposed changes will affect some of the schools, some of our most vulnerable schools, frankly. And we're providing that feedback as we go through the process, and that's just an ongoing conversation. We even had a meeting as recently as this morning. Now, to the extent that those recommendations, when they become recommendations, ultimately, I guess in January, February, we're working with what's in place right now, and being mindful of what may occur. But we haven't made significant adjustments to the plan based on any specific data point that's been provided from the city just yet. But we have that information, and we're going through it because it is changing. But we are very closely, monitoring the work that the city's going through right now, and we'll continue to do so.
So I have an issue with that. I mean, it seems to me if the city's about to adopt one of the most aggressive codes to enable enormous increase in housing capacity in the urban core, that you have to take that into consideration when you are looking at a proposal to close those very urban core schools that would serve that new population. And I'll just say publicly, I think this process is exceptionally rushed. You said you released version 2 earlier this month. This is the 8th of November. When did you release it?
It was last Monday. Version 2. So September.
Friday before that.
Oh, sorry, the Friday before that. So that would have been the
Friday the 1st of November.
7, yeah.
So And the plan is to vote on this final proposal by the 18th?
Yes.
So, yeah.
10 days.
Anyway, I'm 10 days from now. I am extremely concerned that these decisions are being rushed. My presumption is part of that is the pressure from the Chamber of Commerce, because if you just look at it rationally, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to rush to adopt a closure plan before the city, which is, it's well known that they are on the verge of adopting a plan to dramatically increase housing capacity in the urban core. And my other concern is, you say there's 6,000 to 7,000 missing students or open seats. Is that a roughly correct number?
In elementary alone.
In elementary alone. I also understand that you don't have enough capacity for all the people who currently qualify for the K-3 preschool slots that they're eligible for. If you've got mostly 7,000 open slots in your elementary schools, why are you not making that available for the pre-K? And I realize there's probably a lot more detail associated with that, but can you see where these kinds of data points just don't add up and don't make sense?
I would say that we are aggressively expanding our pre-K-3 programs across the whole city, various areas of town. A lot of those places where there are higher demand than seats we have available are at schools that are over capacity, and we are also working with those families to let them know of areas close by to there. But that is where we saw our growth at elementary. Our growth came in pre-K-3. The other grades, unfortunately, lost enrollment overall. And then we saw a lot of growth in middle school. But we are continuing to still expand pre-K-3. We've been very lucky. Both the city has provided us some funding to help us in those expansion efforts. The state has finally provided some funding for pre-K programming at 4-year-old, which actually allows us to free up some of that other money to expand 3-year-old.
Yeah.
We're also expanding Head Start. We are now providing Head Start programming ourselves, and we're continuing to work with Child Inc. and their Head Start program. And we are continuing to work with other daycare centers and PPCD centers in the city to help build that pipeline directly into our pre-K programs. So that's been a big focus of our pre-K director. There is more expansion we can do on 3-year-old pre-K, but we are limited slightly by space available in over-enrolled schools, and we are also limited by the number of teachers that we can hire.
Thank you for that work, and thank you for that response. Colleagues, I certainly have lots of questions that I know I have for our staff that I'll have to ask outside of this meeting, and so thank you for that opportunity to do so. I know our community members have raised lots of questions about a variety of issues that I'm going to follow up on, from how transfers get counted in the capacity numbers or the planning for the future, as well as some of the other issues that my colleagues have raised. Unfortunately, I do think we need to move on at this point.